If you have your Bibles, turn to James chapter 5. You're welcome. I don't know what happened, but I like that. Okay, James chapter 5. Maybe this is a favorite passage. I'm not sure. Okay. No, let me just share with you. If you've not been in the last few weeks, we've been talking about how we don't live life in a vacuum. Our life experience depends very much on how we relate to other people. It's greater than one. Well, as we come to this very last chapter in the book of James, as we've been examining that topic, James finishes the book in a very interesting way. Because here's what he addresses. In the very last chapter, James addresses how we as Christians are to respond when everybody else gets it wrong. In other words, how are we as Christians to respond when people around us don't treat us right, don't treat us well, treat us badly or unfairly? How are we to respond to that? Now before I read from James chapter 5, I think this issue is incredibly timely in 2022 in America. Now, why do I say that? If we can just boil down history to American history, which is not very long to be honest, but if we can just look at American history, throughout American history up until very recently, Christians were the good guys. Christians were considered to be the good guys. Christians were those people everybody liked. Even those who were not Christians respected and liked Christians. Christians were those people you wanted to work for. Christians were those people you wanted to hire. Christians were those people you wanted to live in the house next door. Christians were perceived by culture in general as being positive, as the good guys. But if you're paying attention, you may have noticed that tide is turning. Christians are not considered by many anymore to be the good guys. In the minds of many, Christians are considered to be the problem. And Jesus saw this coming. In fact, Jesus was talking to his disciples about some things that were going to happen at the end of this age, how things were going to end. Let me remind you what he said. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Now watch what he says next. Speaking to his followers. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. And you, Christians, will be hated by all nations because of me. Jesus did not preach a gospel that said, if you'll just follow Jesus, life will be grand. All of your problems will melt away if you'll just profess Christianity. No. Jesus said, look, if you choose to follow me, the world will hate you for it. The world will hate you for it. And in fact, throughout Christian history, we have seen Christians persecuted in every age, in every part of the world. So here's the question. How are you and I as Christians to react? What is our response when, not if, when the tide turns against us? How are we to respond when our government passes laws that make it illegal for us to read and proclaim certain parts of the Bible? How are we to respond to that? Christian, how are we to respond when an increasingly secular culture tries to cancel you out, or to seize your assets, or to freeze your accounts, or to put you in prison, or to fine you for saying and believing certain things. What is the Christian response in a world that is increasingly hostile toward Christians? Okay, in James chapter 5, James starts the chapter by really coming down on a group of people that he refers to as the godless rich people. They were godless rich people. And he talks to them about how they're trusting in things that don't last. But more so, he says, look, you better watch out, because you have accumulated your wealth at the expense of other people. And he comes down hard on them. And then he turns his attention to Christians who had been persecuted by this group of people. Look in James chapter 5. Let's begin reading in verse 7. Here's what he says to Christians. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you'll be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. In this final chapter, before James puts his pen down, he writes about how Christians can patiently persevere in the face of persecution. When others treat us badly, Christians, the proper Christian response is to patiently persevere. And in the time I have left, I would like to unpack exactly what that means. Now, one of the reasons I love James' book in the New Testament, is that he gives us pictures. Have you noticed that over these last several weeks? He gives us illustrations. He gives us examples to help us understand what he's talking about. One of the pictures that James gives us that describes how we are to patiently persevere is the illustration of a farmer. A farmer goes out and he plants his seeds. But no farmer goes out and plants his seed one day and then comes back the next day and expect the crop to be there. No farmer does that. Every farmer knows that once he does his part, there are forces that are beyond his control that must act before the crop comes. A farmer has to patiently wait on things beyond his control before he can harvest his crop. See, that tells us something very important about patient perseverance. Christians, listen, God's timing is not our timing. When we think about the timing of events, the way we think about timing is not the same way God thinks about timing. See, you and I think time is precious. When things don't happen exactly the way we want them to go, when we want them to go that way, we feel ripped off because time is precious. Why is time precious? Because we don't have a lot of it. I mean, at best, we're going to live maybe 100 years. We don't have a lot of time. And when things begin to waste our time, we feel offended by that. And our spirit cries out because time is precious. But that's not the way God thinks about time. Time's precious to us because we don't have a lot of it. God has all the time in the world, and then some. God is not running short on time. Everything that God does, he does on an eternal timeline. Let me say it this way. God's sovereign plan is unfolding over a very long period of time. God sees things not on the timeline of a lifespan. God sees things on an eternal timeline. And listen, the longer the timeline, the shorter, the smaller the problem. Example, I remember when I was in high school. 35 years ago, good grief. 35 years ago, I was in high school. Okay, now I remember being in high school. I have memories of that. And one of the memories I have, it's crystal clear in my brain, is this one. This is never going to end. I remember thinking high school going on forever. I mean, by the time you get to high school, you've already been in school for 10, 12, 13 years. You're just ready to be done. You're ready to get on with your life, go on to college, start a career. You're ready to get on with your life. High school for me seemed to take forever. Okay, I'll soon be 53. I am now looking back on my high school days on a longer timeline. And high school, as I remember it now, my goodness, it was such a brief period of time, just really a blip in my history. Now, what's the difference? Because I am thinking about high school now on a much longer timeline. God sees every event in life on an eternal timeline. So when people mistreat us, when persecution comes, it may seem like, my goodness, we're never going to get over this. This is never going to end. God sees it differently because God sees our challenges on a much longer timeline. Our temporary sufferings, Paul said this, our temporary sufferings are nothing when compared to our eternal glory. God's timing. One of the reasons we can patiently persevere is because God's timing isn't our timing. God has an eternity to make things right. Then James goes on in verse 8. He says, you too be patient and firm because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. What is James saying to these Christians who were being persecuted? He says that the coming of Christ will bring justice that is fair and final. He says one of the reasons we can patiently persevere in the face of persecution is because Jesus is coming back. And when Jesus comes back, he is going to judge with justice that is both fair and final. Okay, I don't want to crush anybody's spirit. I don't want to depress anybody but listen, life is not fair. Don't ever think, well, life should be fair. No, life's not fair at all. Good things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. Guilty people are falsely found not guilty. Unguilty people are falsely found guilty. Listen, life is not fair. But God's justice will be fair and final. Sometimes we as Christians can feel like, this is not a new feeling, we can feel like Asaph, the psalmist, Asaph. Y'all read some of Asaph's psalms? In one of his psalms, Asaph is struggling with this. He says, my goodness, life is so unfair. Good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. In fact, let me read to you what Asaph wrote. Asaph says this, but as for me, my feet almost slipped. I nearly lost my foothold. I nearly lost my faith, he says. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. The unfairness of life is hard for us to stomach. And Asaph himself struggled with this. And Asaph concludes what many Christians conclude. Down in verse 13 of that same psalm. Surely in vain, he concludes, surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. What's he saying? He's saying what many Christians say. Doing right really doesn't seem to pay off. Doing wrong often pays off, but doing right simply doesn't pay off. So I am trying to do right in vain. It is worth nothing. But before Asaph concluded his psalm, he says this: when I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then, watch what he says here. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you placed them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. What is Asaph saying? Asaph is saying while it might look like while life is not fair, and it may look like justice is nowhere, in the end, God's justice is fair and it is final. It doesn't matter how well in the end that we fare according to the world's rules, because they're temporary and they don't last. What ultimately matters is how we fare according to God's rules, because they are eternal. Hebrews chapter 10 verses 30 and 31 says this: for we know him who said, it is mine to avenge. I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Listen, God will balance the scales of justice. His justice will be fair and it will be final, which allows us to patiently persevere. Then James comes to another illustration. Love this. Verse 10, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. Okay, the farmer illustrates how we are to be patient. The prophets illustrate how we are to persevere, the perseverance that we should have. Now, this tells us something very important, and I want to make sure we're clear on this, what it means to patiently persevere. Okay? Patiently persevering does not mean sitting around thinking to ourselves, oh, well, God will one day handle this, so I'll just keep my mouth shut, lay low, let this thing blow over. That is not what patient perseverance looks like. Patient perseverance is not passive. How do we know that? Because the example James uses here were prophets of the Old Testament. Let me ask you a question. Would anyone label any of the prophets of the Old Testament as passive? No, they would not. Prophets were outspoken. Prophets spoke into culture. Prophets stood their ground publicly. So don't think about patiently persevering as just kind of, hiding out until Jesus comes back. And no, that's not what patient perseverance is. It is active, not passive. It's like this. Think of patient perseverance as walking across a river. Okay, if you want to walk across that river in a straight line, if you want to stay true to your path, it is going to take effort because the river is flowing against you. Okay? If you don't exert effort, the river is just going to take you downstream. You're going to go with the flow of the river. But if we want to stay true to our course, you're going to have to exert effort to stay that course. See, listen, Christians. Truth stands still. Truth is not fluid. Truth does not go with the flow. No, truth is fixed. And if you and I are going to stay the course of truth, that means necessarily we are going to have to fight against the downward flow of culture. James tells us, be patiently persevering based on the prophets of the Old Testament. Listen, it is so easy. Christians, it is so easy to be swept away by progressive theology or contemporary cultural ideas. To stand firm requires effort. And then I'll finish with this. In James chapter 5, verse 11, James reminds us of something, one last thing. He says, you've heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Okay, if you want, he points to one specific prophet in particular. He points to a man named Job. And Job is the poster child in the Old Testament for perseverance. The story of Job's a fascinating one. I encourage you to study it sometime. But Job persevered. And the Bible tells us that God used the life of Job to illustrate that our rewards are worth it. Now, this is a valid question. It's a question we ask all the time in many areas of life. We do a cost-benefit analysis, don't we? Is the outcome worth the pain? Is the pain and cost of a college education worth a career that would follow? Is the career worth it? Is the health that I hope to have worth all the pain and time that I spend in the gym? We make decisions like this all the time. Is this really worth it? Cost-benefit analysis is constantly happening in our minds and hearts. James wants us to know that whatever persecution we might face is going to be worth it in the end. Let me read to you from Job's account, very end of the book. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. See, the Lord's full of compassion and mercy. His rewards are lavish. In a world that is increasingly anti-Christian and evil, we can patiently persevere because it will pay off in the end. And I want to leave you with the words of Paul. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Don't let ridicule, don't let persecution, don't let shaming, don't let anything move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. What is the proper response when the tide turns against us? Christians, we're to patiently persevere, knowing that God in His timing will bring fair and final justice, and that in the end, our rewards are worth it. Let me close with this question. Are the investments that you're making in your life worth it? Every single person in this room, one day, no, we don't have to think about this. One day you're going to come to the end of your life. Let me ask you a question. In that moment, on your last day, will you look back at a life and say, wow, I have invested my life well. Now my dividends will pay off for eternity? Or will you look back on a life that was empty, that was void of any eternal significance, and wish you had it to do all over again? Listen, and I'm not saying this to be dramatic, but none of us are promised tomorrow. That's why the Bible is very urgent in its invitation. It says things like, now is the accepted time. Today is the day of salvation. What is the Bible telling us? Since we're not assured of tomorrow, today is the day to be sure that we are ready for eternity, that our eternal rewards await us after this life ends. Can I ask you a question? If this coming week was your last, what would your eternity look like? Are you ready for that? I'd like to finish with a prayer. I pray the similar prayer every week. And the Bible teaches that anyone who prays this prayer from a sincere heart, God will forgive you for your sin. He will actually cleanse your sin, wash your sin away, so that you can spend eternity in heaven with Him. You can have a relationship with Him now, and you can spend eternity with Him forever. But the only way to be cleansed of that sin that will keep all of us out of heaven is to place our faith in what Jesus did to pay for them. Heads are bowed, eyes are closed. The prayer goes like this. Dear God, I recognize I've sinned, I've blown it. I'm not good enough for you. But I believe you sent your son Jesus into this world to die in my place, to pay for the sins I've committed. And I believe that 3 days later, He rose again. And God, in this quiet moment, I am confessing before you my absolute trust in what Jesus did for me, to rescue me from my sin, to wash me whiter than snow, so that I can know you here and I can spend eternity with you in heaven. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Everyone looking back up here. If that was your prayer this morning, I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm not going to ask you to stand up or come up here, no. In a few moments, we're going to dismiss this worship service. If you prayed along with me just now, I would encourage you on your way out when we dismiss to go by guest services. It's over to the left-hand side of the grand foyer. The reason I want you to go by there is that we have something for you. We have literature that explains what it means to place your faith in Jesus, what it means to be forgiven of our sin. If you pray along with me, or if you're curious, would like to know more about Christianity, go by and receive it from us. We give it away just about every single week. So please go by and get it from us. If you're watching online and you prayed along with me, we would love to send that same literature to your home. If you'll simply go to the website, imadeadecision.com, fill the form out there, send us your mailing address, and we'll put that literature in the mail to your home this week. Thank you for watching this video on First Redeemer's YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it, click like below and leave us a comment. And if you'd like more content like this, click subscribe and turn on your notifications. Thanks again for watching.